True love is usually the driver of most stories worth telling, and most fairy tales start with a boy and a girl who want to be together, but they just can't be. Sometimes it's because of an evil stepmother, sometimes it's because of warring families, and sometimes it's because two compatible people don't realize they're compatible at the very beginning. Whatever it is, usually our hero and heroine overcome these obstacles and find a way to be together and live happily ever after. But what about the twin flames who can never seem to find a way to make it work? That's what today's story is about. It's the lament of Sir Alaric and Lady Elowyn. If you're new here, which is everybody at this point, because this is the first tale that I'm telling on this channel is all about fantasy and adventure and nerd stuff. Specifically, super nerdy stories about honor, adventure, good versus evil, light versus dark. Classic fantasy stories that'll make you feel something. Stories that I imagine Sam and Frodo heard when they were kids. So if that sounds like your jam, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so that you can be alerted when we have another installment or another story posted, and we'll post to this channel roughly once a week. So enough of introductions, let's get straight into the tale of Sir Alaric and Lady Elowyn. The ancient kingdom of Mythranor was established and built by the first king, a ruler whose true name was lost to time and history, but whose story is known to all who inhabit the Mithran expanse. The first king established the kingdom of Mythranor in a barren valley known as the Vale Moriel, or the Valley of the Dead, which was inhabited by an evil race of creatures who embraced chaos and dark magic. The Vale Moriel bordered the forest kingdom of the elves known as the Vale Lumen, and for millennia, the elves of the Vale Lumen had held the dark magic and destruction of the Duskaris at bay, but they did not have the strength to defeat this foe, not until the arrival of the first king and his force of 5,000 brave men and women, whom the first king called the Pathfinders. The first king and his 5,000 Pathfinders went to war with the Wood Elves against the Duskaris. The war was bloody and violent, and in a moment of desperation, sensing that victory would slip from their grasp, the Wood Elves shared the secret of their forest with the first king and his fighting force, clothing them in the protective magic of the star thread cloaks, enchanted garments woven from the bioluminescent star thread vine that could heal wounds and prolong life if its fibers were harvested and spun into cloth under the halo of a lunar eclipse. And with the aid of these magical cloaks, the first king and his host, with the army of the Wood Elves, cleared the Vale Moriel of the Duskaris. The first king brought peace to the valley and the borders surrounding the Lumen Vale, and the Wood Elves now had more reasonable neighbors and more secure borders. Following the war, the surviving Pathfinders were granted knighthood, becoming the Knights of the First Order of Mythranor, and their tale became legend, and their magical cloaks became treasure. But over the centuries, these cloaks were hidden, lost, sold, or traded, and their magic faded into the darkness of old history and myth. And long after the magic of the star thread cloaks was lost to history is where our story begins. 4,025 years had passed since the founding of the kingdom of Mythranor. The honor of the great kings had long since faded as greed and power clouded the minds of lesser men who had inherited their station and had forgotten the price which was paid to establish the kingdom of men. Where once walked great rulers whose duty was to the betterment of the kingdom, now idled lords and ladies who had developed a taste for lavish living. Kings and queens spent frivolously beyond the crown's means, and, as it is often said, good times produce weak men, and it is often weak men who lust after that which is not theirs, producing hard times. And this was the case with King Osric, who ruled over Mythranor in the 4th millennia of the reign of the kings. It was in the 4,000th year that King Osric became painfully aware of the dire financial position that he and others who had come before him had secured for the crown and the kingdom of Mythranor. The money was running out, and it was also at this time that rumors began to spread that the goblin warlord, Rankrock, had amassed a vast fortune in the rolling hills east of the Ivory Mountains. And seeing an opportunity to replenish the crown's vaults with fresh gold and silver, King Osric began to plan in secret to rally his armies, launch a campaign, and take that which was not his. Now, King Osric was greedy, but he was also cunning, and he knew that even a king could not do as he pleased without challenge or dissent. So Osric devised a plan. He drew men from their defensive posts from Mythranor's eastern borders and brought them to the capital to train under the king's guard, an action that simultaneously ensured that Osric's forces would grow stronger and more sharpened as they trained in the capital, while at the same time leaving Mythranor's eastern borders vulnerable to goblin raids. This, Osric knew, would strike fear into the hearts of Mythranor's citizens and ruling class, making it easier to sway the people of Mythranor to support an invasion of the goblin lands in the east, under the guise of making safe the kingdom, which would provide a path for Osric to take the warlord Rankrock's treasure and build Mythranor's wealth. So, in the spring of the year 4025 of the reign of the kings, King Osric consolidated his forces in Mythranor's capital to prepare for this plan that he had devised in secret. Now, one of these knights that he had pulled from Mythranor's eastern borders was a man named Sir Alaric, a man of deep loyalty and honor whose family had served the crown since the founding of Mythranor. Alaric had sworn an oath to king and crown to put no other person, care, or pursuit above the commands of the king. It was an oath he intended to fulfill by his life or his death. So when King Osric called, Sir Alaric answered. But when Alaric arrived at court in the capital of Mythranor, something happened he did not intend. Lady Elowyn was handmaiden to the queen and also overseer of the queen's royal gardens. She was as kind as she was beautiful and was loved dearly by the queen, who she had served faithfully since the queen had been married to King Osric. But in recent years, the queen had become troubled, for Elowyn had drawn the attention of many men in the royal court, and some had even whispered that she had drawn the wandering gaze of the king himself. For Lady Elowyn was a rare beauty, and even the blind could see this, because beneath Elowyn's charcoal hair and bright eyes as cool and blue as ice was a warmth and depth of kindness that drew people to her for reasons that most could not even explain. And although the queen loved Elowyn, jealousy began to poison the queen's heart, and the queen of Mythranor began to envy the poor girl from the countryside who had been sent to be her handmaid a decade earlier. Elowyn had been raised in a simple cottage on the grounds of a great hall ruled by one of the lords of the south, who had been given his station by King Osric. Elowyn's childhood home was always full of love and laughter that had filled her heart until the day she was sent to court to serve as handmaiden to the queen. Elowyn was only 11 at the time she arrived at the capital, and she had nothing to her name but a small wooden chest that had been sent with her by her parents, and she and the chest were ignored by almost everyone within the walls of the king's castle. But as time had passed, she grew into a rare beauty who drew the eyes of all. Many had tried to win her heart with gifts or promises of elevating her status, but Elowyn had no desire for power or wealth. Her heart was wild and free like the countryside she grew up in, and she had found peace in tending the queen's gardens. But although it wasn't apparent to those on the outside, Elowyn did have ambitions and desires. She hoped to fall in love with someone who loved her back as purely as her parents loved each other. She craved a love that was real, for she despised the lies, scandals, and masks worn by the lords and ladies that haunted the royal courts of Mythranor. So, when the king's forces from the surrounding lands filed into the royal city, Elowyn was immediately drawn to a lone knight who spent his days training, hours after the other knights had hung their armor and retreated into the city. His name was Sir Alaric, and it wasn't just his discipline that made him different from the others. His kindness was soft, and his general disinterest for power and depravity mirrored Elowyn's disdain for the life led by the royal family and their satellites. And this drew her to him. She watched him from afar as he trained in the gardens, something else that set him apart from the others the king had called to the capital, who were content to do their drills in the fields until their commanders released them. After normal early morning drills and sparring, Sir Alaric would retreat to the sunny courtyard by the royal gardens that Elowyn tended to, and here he would swing his sword alone, with endless energy and focus, unaware of the pair of cool blue eyes that had found him so captivating. And it was Elowyn who first approached Alaric.
Sir, I see you every morning, coming here to train after all the others have finished their drills in the fields.
Elowyn's cheeks flushed as she spoke.
That's the stupidest thing you could have said to this man,
she thought to herself. But Sir Alaric smiled. Training, he grinned at her. sheepishly swinging his sword at the grass.
I'm fighting invisible wraiths who aim to bring down Mythranor.
Elowyn stared at him for a moment.
I haven't lost a fight against them yet.
Alaric finished with an even wider grin. A moment passed, and Elowyn laughed.
And I thank you, good sir,
Replied Elowyn, swaying on her heels.
for protecting us.
She studied him through a smile she couldn't hold back, so she pressed him.
Surely you must want to join the others who take their leave after drills. Why not retreat to the city for drink and company? Why stay tirelessly defending us from wraiths no one can see?
Sir Alaric took a breath and turned to face Elowyn, truly seeing her now for the first time. Her beauty washed over him, and her smile disarmed him, prompting him to answer more directly.
My mother had a garden like this, but as a boy, I was caught up in the tales of great knights and noble kings of old Mythranor. I would train in the summer sun while my mother spent her time in the garden, and when she died, a part of me died with her. But I could always feel her in the garden, and somehow I feel her here. When I swing my sword, I can almost see her pruning the bushes from the corner of my eye, and this place seems to center my soul while I push my mind into dark places.
His voice trailed off into a place that Elowyn could sense was wrought with pain. She did not know what to say to any of this, but Sir Alaric filled the silence, noticing the dark soil beneath Elowyn's fingernails.
I can tell that whoever turns this garden must have the same love for things that grow as my mother.
He smiled at her and went back to swinging his sword, battling his invisible wraiths with new purpose from that moment forward. Elowyn and Alaric fell into each other with a love that blossomed in stolen glances and whispered conversations. One evening, as the castle's lanterns flickered in the twilight, Alaric found Elowyn by a fountain in the center of the Queen's garden. His brow was furrowed, and Elowyn could tell that something was bothering him.
So Alaric,
Elowyn said,
what troubles you?
Elowyn, I fear that I might not be the honorable man you think me to be.
Elowyn studied his eyes, wondering what might come next.
Of course you are. You answered the king's call to rally his forces. You train harder than any of his other subjects.
Elowyn fished for a smile,
You've slain so many invisible wraiths.
but Alaric didn't find this funny.
I swore an oath to the king.
Alaric interrupted.
I swore to put no other person, care, or pursuit above serving the king and crown. Yet I feel that every breath I take and every thought I have belongs to you.
Elowyn blushed and looked away.
I've lived in the capital for a decade, and in that time I've seen lord and lady swear oaths to the king only to break them for a bag of gold or midnight rendezvous with a lover for the night.
Elowyn looked out over the gardens.
I know dishonorable men well,
She continued.
and you are not one of them, Sir Alaric.
She finished her thoughts as she turned back to him, only to find him inches from her face. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her into a kiss that was ranked among the 5 most passionate and pure of all kisses since the very invention of the kiss. And if you must know, the most pure kiss of all time since the invention of the kiss was between Wesley and Buttercup in The Princess Bride. But that's another story. This is Alaric and Elowyn's story, which is all made possible by our sponsor today, Knightweave. Knightweave makes beautiful, fully functional cloaks for the journey there and back again. It's a business started by me and my wife. I have one here. All of our cloaks are made of sensory-safe materials. No animal materials are used. The inside is this extremely soft faux rabbit fur liner, and the outside is a durable, soft, comfortable material as well. And these are not just cheap costume pieces. These are so soft and enjoyable that you will wind up using yours every single day, and they're built to last. The one that I have is 11 years old and running strong, and customers from all over the world are giving us 5-star reviews every day. These things sell out extremely fast, so make sure you click the link in the description to grab yours today. Now let's get back to the story. As the two kissed goodnight, Sir Alaric whispered to Elowyn,
One day, when my duty is done and the shadow of this war has passed, I'll take you away from here.
and for the first time in her life, Elowyn clung to the words and promises of someone who came from nobility. Alaric and Elowyn grew inseparable outside of their duties, meeting each other in secret every night. Alaric would tell Elowyn of his training and the rumors that he heard of why the king had called so many knights and bannermen to the capital. And Elowyn, in turn, shared stories of her childhood, of the fields and forests that she loved to explore, and the whispers of war that she heard from the ladies at court. And that's it for part 1. But don't worry, because we're posting part 1 and part 2 at the same time. So make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so that you can get notified for future releases to this story and others. But to keep watching and find out what happens to Elowyn and Alaric, all you have to do is watch the next video in this playlist. Buckle up, wrap yourself in a warm cloak, because this story gets pretty crazy. My name's Christopher Claflin, you're watching Knightweave, and we'll see you over there on the next episode.